Good morning, I'm Anthony Newbold. Welcome to the ZNS Network's live coverage of the House of Assembly. Network, of course, because in addition to Parliamentary Channel 40, we welcome ZNS Channel 13 on Cable 11, Radio 1540, the National Voice, Radio 810 in Grand Bahama, and 104.5. We welcome all of you, and of course, we are streaming live at livestream.com/ZNS Bahamas. You can also visit us on our website at znsbahamas.com, and of course you can hit us up on Facebook this morning as well. A blustery morning here in Parliament Square as we await the budget communication for the year 2013-2014. The government, in the person of the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Perry Gladstone Christi, will lay out the financial roadmap for 12 months beginning on July the 1st. We're going to try to give you some context this morning. And so we are going to take you back to July 30th, 2012, and a little closer than that to February 25th this year. On July 30th was the first budget communication from the new Progressive Liberal Party government, and of course Mr. Christi and his parliamentary caucus will tell you that that was not really their budget because they didn't have time really to prepare a PLP budget. It was a leftover from the F&M, and you're going to hear a lot about leftovers and carryovers from the F&M. You will also hear some of the figures from February 25th, which would have been the mid-year budget statement. And we're going to see what Mr. Christie's got in that budget for the way ahead, and some of the areas that bears watching, like NEMA. How much money will NEMA have, or social services? But before we get to any of that, what I normally do is the countdown to independence, and we talk about what they were doing in the House of Assembly 40 years ago. May 30th, actually, 1973, what were they doing in the House? Well, tell you some of the things. The Speaker, Arlington Butler, reading a letter from then Milo Butler. He was resigning his seat in the House of Assembly. He would be appointed the first Bahamian Governor General on July 31st, 1973. There would be a by-election for that seat. Samilo represented Bainstown. There would be a by-election on July the 19th. A young Norman Gay would succeed him, vanquishing, they said at the time, his two opponents, Calvin Cooper, the former Director of Works representing the Free National Movement, and a 22-year-old Wesley Campbell. He represented the Vanguard Nationalist and Socialist Party, all three of them having differing views on why Dr. Gay won that seat in the manner he did. And the manner was going from an 82% turnout in September of 1972, there was a little over a 60% turnout for that by-election. Some thought it was because it was a PLP stronghold, and people thought, listen, we've got that in the bag, so they just didn't come out. Someone else said, listen, I think that was Andrew Dudd Maynard, then chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party. He said, listen, some of those people have moved out. They've gone into new low-cost housing development. Wesley Campbell and the Vanguard Nationalist and Socialist Party thought that's just people saying they really are not happy with the Progressive Liberal Party. Either way, Dr. Gay succeeded Sir Milo Butler. Also, way back in 1973, Select Committee to investigate drug trafficking in the Bahamas. Persons on that committee like Cadwell and Brister and Noel Roberts and Kendall Isaacs, among those on that committee. Also, interesting questions about the Broadcasting Corporation even then. Michael Lightburn wanted to know how much was the chairman of the Broadcasting Corporation making in salary? $12,000, as it turned out. Those were some of the things they talked about in that meeting on May the 30th, 1973. Also, interestingly, a resolution to borrow some money for capital works. They were looking for $3.9 million. Budget for capital works last year was $229 million. Some context, some historical facts about this House of Assembly. 40 years of Parliament is coming up. It's a program we're producing for you in the Parliamentary Channel. Back to where we are today. The budget communication, 2013-2014. 10 o'clock, we expect the Prime Minister to begin delivering that communication. We know that he traveled to Trinidad for a CARICOM meeting, should have returned to the country last evening. We hope he did safely. We haven't heard otherwise. We're going to presume that he did. But let's go back to July 30, 2012. Carla Palmer has some highlights from that budget communication, the first budget communication from the new Progressive Liberal Party government under the leadership of Prime Minister Perry Christi. Here's Carla Palmer.
During the election campaign leading up to the May 7, 2012 general election, the Progressive Liberal Party government, in its Charter for Governance, outlined and set a self-imposed deadline to fulfill 14 promised initiatives by its 100th day in office. These include fighting the high level of crime in the country, and as a first step, the government launched Project Save Bahamas, Operation Ceasefire, and relaunched Urban Renewal 2.0, which focuses on fostering community involvement and a better working relationship with the police. Create a Ministry for Grand Bahama was another initiative. Double the nation's investment in education and training, re-establish the Ministry of Financial Services and Investments, hold a referendum on a national lottery and gambling, reduce the maximum level of stamp tax payable on real estate transactions from 12% to 10%, introduce the Employees Pension Fund Act, renew the nation's commitment to national health insurance, initiate a plan to lower the cost of electricity, introduce the Employees Pension Fund Protection Act to make directors and officers personally liable for breaches, reposition the Bahamas Development Bank as a key player in job creation and expanding small and medium-sized businesses, implement a plan to secure our nation's borders, launch a 40th anniversary of Independence National Congress to begin enactment of Vision 2030, and reintroduce a ceiling on the maximum level of real property taxes payable on a residence. The government has, for the most part, lived up to its promises, but the level of success with many of its initiatives have been questioned. However, the government's ability to fulfill these commitments was severely impacted by the state of the country's finances. Upon taking office, Prime Minister the Right Honorable Perry Christi promised to get the country's fiscal house in order. The government, in its first budget communication, embraced a capital expenditure amounting to $400 million, initially estimated at $280 million. However, the increase was 43% over target, resulting in an increase of $119 million. Recurrent expenditure was recorded as being on the increase in excess of $1.7 million, up by $27 million from its initial forecast, and recurrent revenue was thumbs down, with a projected outturn of $1.450 million. However, this area saw a substantial decrease by a whopping $64 million. To this end, the Ministry of Grand Bahama was allocated $3.2 million in its initial stage. $4.4 million was earmarked for the reinstated Ministry of Financial Services, and $15 million has been allocated for the early implementation of the government's initiatives as they relate to crime-fighting strategies like urban renewal in the country. Major allocations in the 2012-2013 budget include $206.8 million for interest on the public debt, $120 million for public debt redemption, $201 million for the Department of Education, $199 million for the Public Hospitals Authority, $132 million for the Royal Bahamas Police Force, $85 million for the Ministry of Tourism, and the projected total deficit was $570 million. For the Parliamentary Channel, I'm Carla Palmer.
Carla Palmer talking about the 2012 May 30th budget communication, the first one by Prime Minister Christi in this new government. You shouldn't be worrying or questioning those figures from Carla Palmer, but if you are, you look to the budget communication 2012. That's where those numbers came from. And we're going to hear some more about numbers and what has transpired over the last 11 months or so. Let's go back now to February 25th. That was the mid-year budget statement from Prime Minister Christi. Cyan Thompson has a recap of that presentation.
During the election campaign leading up to the May 7th, 2012 general election, the Progressive Liberal Party government, in its charter for governance, outlined and set a self-imposed deadline to fulfill 14 promised initiatives by its 100th day in office. These include fighting the high level of crime in the country, and as a first step, the government launched Project Safe Bahamas, Operation Ceasefire, and relaunched Urban Renewal 2.0, which focuses on fostering community involvement and a better working relationship with the police. Create a Ministry for Grand Bahama was another initiative. Double the nation's investment in education and training, re-establish the Ministry of Financial Services and Investments, hold a referendum on a national lottery and gambling, reduce the maximum level of stamp tax payable on real estate transactions from 12% to 10%, introduce the Employees Pension Fund Act, renew the nation's commitment to national health insurance, initiate a plan to lower the cost of electricity, introduce the Employees Pension Fund Protection Act to make directors and officers personally liable for breaches, reposition the Bahamas Development Bank as a key player in job creation and expanding small and medium-sized businesses, implement a plan to secure our nation's borders, launch a 40th anniversary of Independence National Congress to begin enactment of Vision 2030, and reintroduce a ceiling on the taxes payable on a residence. The government has, for the most part, lived up to its promises, but the level of success with many of its initiatives have been questioned. However, the government's ability to fulfill these commitments was severely impacted by the state of the country's finances. Upon Minister of the Right Honorable Perry Christi promised to get the country's fiscal house in order. The government, in its first budget communication, embraced a capital expenditure amounting to $400 million, initially estimated at $280 million. However, the increase was 43% over target, resulting in an increase of $119 million. Expenditure was recorded as being on the increase in excess of $1.7 million, up by $27 million from its initial forecast, and recurrent revenue was thumbs down, with a projected outturn of $1.450 million. However, this area saw a substantial decrease by a whopping $64 million. To this end, the Ministry of Grand Bahama was allocated $3.2 million in its initial stage. $4.4 million was earmarked for the reinstated Ministry of Financial Services, and $15 million has been allocated for the early implementation of the government's initiatives as they relate to crime-fighting strategies like urban renewal in the country. Major allocations in the 2012-2013 budget include $206.8 million for interest on the public debt, $120 million for public debt redemption, $201 million for the Department of Education, $199 million for the Public Hospitals Authority, $132 million for the Royal Bahamas Police Force, Ministry of Tourism. Total deficit was $5 million. For the Parliamentary Channel, I'm Carla Palmer.
Well, you got a double dose of Carla Palmer this morning. Now we're going to give you that recap with Cyan Thompson from February 25th, 2013. That was the mid-year budget presentation from Prime Minister Christi.
During the afternoon session, member for Mycal, the Honorable V. Alfred Gray, spoke about the difficult times Bahamians are facing, some to the point where they are losing their homes.
First, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the government for bringing this bill to Parliament. It's timely, Mr. Speaker, for the fact that economic times which are difficult are upon us. And I believe that more people will perhaps be in need of our covering or legislative covering than perhaps any time in our history.
In his contribution, member for Pine Ridge, Dr. Michael Darville, explained that he sees firsthand the struggles of Grand Bahama residents.
As a medical practitioner, I encountered many distressed families who, due to foreclosures, were left homeless, with nowhere to go, and nothing to start over because of the devastating effects of unemployment, chronic illness, and many instances age and a poor mortgage history, preventing them from ever receiving a mortgage again. Mr. Speaker, I could vividly remember a family of four just a few years ago who was eventually evicted from their home after failing to pay their mortgage for about 1 year because of joblessness, and due to their dire circumstances was found living in an abandoned commercial building. In fact, the record would reflect that there are many similar documented cases throughout Grand Bahama, and as a caring government, we are obligated to help bring dignity to the lives of the less fortunate and to pass laws to protect their homeowners and create sustainable jobs.
Meantime, some opposition members were critical of the Homeowners Protection Bill. Member for East Grand Bahama, Peter Turnquest, questioned why certain elements were not in the bill.
Mr. Speaker, this bill attempts to legislate and regulate some of the mortgage management and collection procedures already in place at most financial institutions. And this is already agreed to and stated by both the Minister of State for Finance and the Minister of State for Legal Affairs. It does not address, however, the core issues of job creation or the cost of obtaining a mortgage in the first place. For instance, it does not address administrative fees charged by banks for loans up front. It does not address the cost of legal fees and how we might be able to save on those costs through a proper land registry. It does not address the interest rate spread between the deposit rates and lending rates. These are issues that need to be addressed, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Seabreeze, Hope Strawn, in her remarks, said that Bahamians are oftentimes at a disadvantage when it comes to lending institutions.
And there are myriad other inequities which we would see in home ownership. Here in the Bahamas, there's little statistical information in the public domain to assess where we are at on these inequities. But anecdotally, the general populace feels that the odds are against them acquiring a home mostly. And this is based on the premise that it is not easy for the ordinary average owner to negotiate with the commercial banks for a mortgage. And secondly, that the costs associated with home ownership and acquiring a home is generally prohibitive. Mr. Speaker, someone determining to acquire a home will have to make a determination as to whether they want to build a home or whether they want to buy a home. And then comes the whole issue of how do I acquire this home and what do I need to acquire the home.
The proposed Homeowners Protection Bill is expected to put the Bahamas on par with other countries worldwide. Here's what member for St. Anne's, Hubert Chipman, had to say.
Mr. Speaker, for the majority of us, owning a house will probably be the biggest investment most of us will ever make on this side of heaven.
The average Bahamian works for most or all of his life to own just a piece of the rock. Mr. Speaker, this type of legislation is not new in seeking the protection of homeowners. Laws have been enacted in most of the developed countries like the UK, Canada, Australia, and the US. Laws have also been enacted throughout the region.
Member for Tall Pines, Leslie Miller, is well acquainted with the challenges of home ownership through his constituents. He continues to see single mothers struggle to pay their mortgages.
Another example, Mr. Speaker, in Avocado Garden is this in my constituency. Property size, 5,800 square foot. Building size, 1,000 square foot. Value, $152,000. It borders me, another one, Freeler subdivision, again in my constituency. Property size, 5,000 square foot. Building size, 1,220 square foot. Appraised value, $182,000. It is just not realistic that you would place that sort of value on these properties for the small size of the houses. And lots are now going in these average over-the-hill subdivisions for as much as $10 a square foot.
That was actually a recap of the last session of Parliament. We need to go back a little further. We're going to go there now. This is from February 25th. Signed Thompson Still with that recap.
In this statement, my government is committing itself to a course of prudent stewardship of the nation's economy and fiscal affairs. It includes no increases in taxes.
Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Perry Christi, during his mid-year budget statement, addressed the diversification of the economy and ways that his administration will make it happen.
My government set out an aggressive plan to transform the Bahamian economy and society for the benefit of all Bahamians. We are firmly committed to the pursuit of the various critical components of that plan by, among other things, 1, relentlessly attacking the crime problem, which is vital to creating an environment propitious to strong growth and job creation. 2, strengthening our key tourism industry. 3, promoting additional foreign direct investment across the country, and particularly in Grand Bahama and the Family Islands. 4, exploring avenues for further diversifying our economy, especially in the agricultural area, through science and technology to improve our competitiveness in food production. 2 initiatives will play a pivotal role in the transformative process, namely an Agricultural and Marine Science Institute on North Andros and a 20-year development plan that has been developed for an innovative, science-based and technology-driven agricultural sector.
Also an area for growth and further expansion is financial services.
Further development and expansion of our yachting and shipping registries. Expanding our investments in education. And let me say in the expanding our yachting and shipping registries, also extending it to an aircraft registry. Expanding our investments in education and strengthening national training through the establishment of the National Training Agency to establish a competency-based training and job placement system that is flexible and responsive to the actual requirements of the workplace. We have since the election focused our attention on these and the other major areas of our change and growth agenda. And we will persist in planning and further developing initiatives that assuredly will get our country to where it should be economically and fiscally going forward. Based on developments to this point, with the virtual completion of the tourism plant in New Providence with Atlantis and Bahamas, as well as new developments that we are currently examining in Bimini, Grand Bahama, San Salvador, Abaco, Eleuthera, and Cat Island, I harbor a great sense of optimism for the future. The fiscal measures that I will set out in this plan are an integral component of our growth strategy and will ensure that the government will be soundly placed financially to implement the full complement of initiatives that comprise that strategy. As such, it is desirable that we move to address the fiscal challenges as promptly as possible. Mr. Speaker, shortly after the elections in the 2012-2013 budget communication, I indicated that my government had inherited a very difficult fiscal situation from its predecessor, which, in addition to a large negative imbalance between recurrent expenditure and revenue, also featured significant cost overruns and carryover expenditure into the current fiscal year. As a result, our room to maneuver was severely constrained as we developed the 2012-2013 budget within a very tight time frame from the May or after the May 2012 elections.
Prime Minister Christi explained the $100 million expenditure by the government.
In light of this situation, I stated our firm commitment to restoring public finances to a healthier and more sustainable position. And to that end, I outlined specific and significant structural reforms that would be implemented as part of a medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. I laid out plans to implement a fundamental of our tax system and to strengthen our system of tax administration. I will shortly provide a brief update on the status of these various initiatives. However, economic and fiscal developments in the first half of the 2012-2013 fiscal year have been less than favorable than had been expected, and the government has had to make operational adjustments to ensure that we deliver on the full fiscal year targets. In the first half period to December 2012, we noted the following: weaker than expected economic growth, and consequently lower than expected recurrent revenue collections. Early in the 2012-13 fiscal year, the government was also obliged to reduce its level of short-term bank financing, which had accumulated due to the consistent shortfalls in the projected revenues over the last 3 fiscal years, 2009 to 10, 2011 to 12. The short-term financing was provided by the central bank through advances and the purchase of treasury bills, and by the Royal Bank of Canada through an increase in the then government's overdraft facility to $200 million from the normal $100 million. When we came to office, we also faced some $100 million in carry-over expenditures from the 2011 to 2012 fiscal period. This $100 million expenditure included the following obligations that we inherited: unpaid checks and wire transfers, $63.14 million. So unpaid checks and wire transfers, $63.14 million. Secondly, With respect to the 52-week job program, $23 million to be paid. And Teachers Public Service Union lump sum payments of $10.86 million. On top of facing these unpaid bills, the government has proceeded to reduce the overdraft facility in keeping with our debt management reform exercise, which was foreshadowed during the debate on the amendment to the Financial Administration and Audit Act, which took place in November 2012. The benefit of this reduction of the overdraft facility is that it will substantially reduce the overall cost of financing. Nevertheless, these bills must be paid. With these adjustments in short-term financing facilities, it is necessary to settle these obligations through longer-term borrowing. In December of 2012, Moody's announced a downgrade in our country's credit rating, along with a negative outlook. To underpin its statement, Moody's cited a significant deterioration of the government's balance sheet since 2007, which was exacerbated by a low revenue base and a high rising debt level. In September 2012, Standard & Poor's downgraded the outlook for our credit rating to negative over similar concerns about our debt dynamics and the strength of our commitment to fiscal reforms. The latest International Monetary Fund Article 4 staff consultation report that was presented to the Executive Board of the Fund on February 4th of this year also calls for the implementation of a medium-term framework for broad-based fiscal consolidation to address, in its words, the imperative of a lower debt burden. Mr. Speaker, I want to stress at this point, and in the strongest terms possible, that these are not merely academic matters of little interest to the average Bahamian. As I will explain shortly, the fiscal straits in which the government finds itself have a direct and significant bearing on both the affairs of government and the daily lives of our citizens. As well, we face the prospects of higher rates of interest on any future borrowings at a time when our annual interest expenses already exceed $200 million and consume roughly 1 out of every $7 we earn, 1 out of every 7 revenue dollars. That is money that is simply siphoned away from the valuable programs and services that the government could be providing to the public each.
The Prime Minister described the condition of the Bahamian economy and expectations for the future.
The International Monetary Fund forecast is that the Bahamian economy will grow by 2.7% in real terms in 2013, as had been presented at the time of the 2012-2013 budget. Beyond this year, given the emerging developments that I have outlined above, as Minister of Finance, I am confident that the Bahamian economy can achieve significantly stronger growth with the attendant creation of additional employment opportunities. Permit me now to address the fiscal situation. Budget performance in 2012-2013 recurrent revenue. The evolution of recurrent revenues in the first 6 months of the 2012-2013 fiscal year reflected the economic developments during that period. Our intake was not as strong as expected because the growth in current dollar terms, which is our effective tax base, has not been as robust as anticipated. A tighter rein on expenditures is therefore necessary to ensure that we deliver on our deficit target of 6.5% of GDP, to which we committed ourselves at the start of this fiscal year. On the expenditure side, recurrent spending during the first half of the fiscal year had been broadly in line with the budget, and the government had executed about 45% of its planned expenditure. With respect to capital expenditure during the first half of the fiscal year amounted to some 36% of the projected level for the full year presented in the last budget communication. And so with respect to fiscal plan of action in 2012, 2013 and beyond, I will say that at the mid-year, the government is making internal adjustments to ensure that we meet the GFS deficit target of 6.5% of GDP that I referred to and was spoken of in the last budget communication. Moreover, we are beginning to lay the foundation for more comprehensive reforms to deliver on a medium-term consolidation of public finances. Honorable members may expect a more detailed elaboration of policy actions to achieve our objectives in the forthcoming 2013-2014 budget communication. As for recurrent expenditure, the Ministry of Finance is using traditional methods at its disposal to contain the expenditures of government ministries and departments over the remainder of the current fiscal year. As well, the government expects
Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christi, telling you what he's going to do today, which is the 2013-2014 budget communication he's about to deliver in a few minutes. You can see outside, blustery as I told you, and you would know certainly if you are in New Providence, they didn't do that expected walk across the square from Rawson to Parliament Square that we expected. The rain, and so they are now inside the chamber preparing for the start of this morning's session. Where is Mr. Christi going to go? He's going to give you allocations for all of the various ministries and departments. How much money is immigration going to get, for example? The Minister of Immigration said during the mid-year budget communication that he'd already spent most of the $900,000 he'd been allocated. Is NEMA going to get some more money? Well, social services. We'll see how much money they get. Let's join Pastor Hugh Roach as he gives the invocation at the start of this morning's session.
Let all Prime Minister have the opposition those authority over us to give back to those who defend them of the least dependable. For those, dear Lord, who are in despair, in distress, because of the floods of water lift the shore, I ask that you will lift these floods and provide something they might need, so that they will have a comfortable and peaceful life. Bless the government in various ways, dear Lord, to improve the jobs available. And bless the educators, because the rest of our students who hope to pass the national examinations they're taking. Bless us, O Lord, for we are in need of having a special blessing this day. And we thank you for health and for strength, and for all the good things too numerous to mention. Accept our gratitude through Jesus Christ our Lord in heaven, when we pray and say together.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
Amen.
D. Gomez, K. Roll, Dr. Minnis, D. Smith, C. Hamilton, R. Wells, A. Morse, M. Grant, Butler Turner, P. L. Miller, P. Turnquest, Dr. Rollins, R. Lightburn, P. Forbes, A. Forbes, H. Chipman, G. Morse, T. Neely, R. Curry.
Good morning, honorable members. What a wonderful day in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and a nice day to be alive. Before we begin our proceedings, I'd just like to advise all members, honorable members, to turn their phones in the off or the vibrate position, and I will pause for a few seconds to allow you to do that. Thank you very much. Today is Wednesday, the 29th day of May in the year of our Lord 2013, and I'd like to welcome you to this honorable sitting of Parliament in the House of Assembly. As we've been given the task for peace, order, and good governance, today is regarded as Budget Communication Day, where we will lay several documents and first reading of appropriation bills. But before we commence our proceedings, just wanted to pause and pay tribute to the team of the Garden Hills Community Outreach, who successfully held a Mother's Day concert and recognition service this past Saturday evening. What a wonderful time, and I'd like to congratulate our team for a wonderful exercise of delicious food, lovely gifts, anointing psalms and praise and worship, and what a wonderful group of mothers throughout New Bethlehem Baptist Church. Thank you to Carolyn Farrington and the team for a job well done. Now to the order of business. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognized the honorable member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I could obtain the unanimous consent of the House to have statements and communications by ministers just before the laying of documents by ministers. The communication is the budget communication, so, and then we'll have the laying of documents.
Very well. Member of Parliament for, honorable member for Kalani, member of Parliament for Central Grand Bahama, as you please rise and give your views.
We have no objections.
Member for Cat Island, Rum Key, if you could just do so as we, in the form of a motion, and we could.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the order of business for this House on this day be altered by having communication, the budget communication, immediately before the laying of documents by ministers.
It is moved and seconded to have the order of the business altered for communication by ministers to precede laying of documents by ministers. As many in favor will remain seated, those opposed will stand. The order of the business has been varied. Statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the right honorable member for Centerville.
Much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to present the 2013-2014 budget communication. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will be aware that Mr. Ehud Cunningham, former acting financial secretary, passed away just last weekend. So I would like to take this opportunity to express my personal gratitude and that of the nation for the many years of dedicated and tireless service that he so warmly provided to his dearly beloved country. Mr. Cunningham was instrumental in initiating and indeed championed many of the fundamental and much needed reforms to government on which we are presently embarked. His memory will live on in the enhanced economy and society that will emerge from our efforts. Mr. Speaker, this is a pivotal budget in the history of our small nation. It is a budget that secures the future for all Bahamians. The economy has clearly, in our view, turned the corner, and we can anticipate steady, ongoing growth and employment creation in the period ahead. I would reiterate at this time my abiding optimism for the future in the areas of employment and entrepreneurship with the completion of the tourism plant of Atlantis and Bahamas in New Providence, as well as developments underway or in the pipeline in Bimini, Grand Bahama, Exuma, San Salvador, Abaco, Eleuthera, and Cat Island, among others. In this budget, my government is acting decisively to improve the health of the public finances and to pull us out of the debilitating public debt spiral that we inherited upon coming to office. We are also strengthening the foundations of the economy to secure steady growth and private sector employment creation. In this way, we are positioning my government to have the resources with which to implement over the full course of our mandate initiatives that will strengthen law and order, promote stronger growth and job creation, and solidify our firm commitment to maintaining and reforming our social safety net for the effective delivery of relief to the disadvantaged and to the needy in our midst. Honorable members will recall that in the mid-year budget statement that I presented in February of this year, I laid out the critical fiscal challenges that confront my government, and I presented an action plan over both the near term and the medium term to restore our public finances to a more desirable and sustainable position. This communication follows up on the commitment that I made at that time to provide a more detailed elaboration of the comprehensive reforms and policy actions in respect of both expenditure and revenue that will secure our overriding fiscal consolidation objectives. Let there be no misconception about our commitment to healthier public finances. We have pledged to the Bahamian people an ambitious and targeted program of fundamental change to bring about better economic and social outcomes for all. Mr. Speaker, we will fulfill that pledge. Notwithstanding our improved growth prospects, as I explained at length in the mid-year statement, we find ourselves at present severely constrained in our ability to fully implement our change agenda. The fiscal mismanagement of which I spoke in the mid-year statement has left the resources of government stretched just too thin. We must of necessity be more cost efficient in our operations and aggressively seek to enhance revenue performance. The legacy of high public deficits and spiraling debt burden that we inherited is brutally onerous. Almost $1 out of every $4 in revenue collected by the government must be allocated to pay the interest charges on the public debt and cover the debt repayment. Had we chosen to ignore the grave structural imbalance in the public finances, the debt would have continued to spin out of control. My earlier assertion in February that we find ourselves at a critical juncture in public administration is founded on this sobering reality. The near-term implementation of the vital portions of our agenda, such as job creation, attacking crime, and strengthening the social safety net, will come about through a reprioritization of how public sector resources are spent while we maintain a strong focus on medium-term fiscal consolidation. I would remind honorable members that through our fiscal consolidation strategy, we expect to eliminate the GFS deficit and return the government finances to surpluses. We will also reverse the government's primary balance position from deficits to surpluses, and in so doing cause the burden of public debt to decline over time. Fiscal consolidation and a lower debt burden are not objectives in and of themselves, but rather the means to the attainment of the far greater economic and social goals that we all cherish. For the ordinary Bahamian, it means that valuable public sector resources, instead of being used for principal and interest payments, will be used for the hiring of police and defense force officers, doctors, nurses, and for programs that fight poverty and the like. It means that we would have transformed the administrative bureaucracy of the public sector into a leaner and more efficient system that would of necessity have to be more responsive to the needs of the Bahamian people.
Yes, sir.
It is customary that the Minister of Finance would present his budget in the context of domestic and international economic developments. I will do so briefly and then turn to both our strategy for enhancing domestic growth and employment and the details of our fiscal action plan to restore the sustainability of our public finances. Permit me, Mr. Speaker, to acknowledge the Central Bank of the Bahamas for its analysis, which I now summarize. I invite honorable members to peruse the analysis in more details in the annex. The global economy. As for the global economy, prospects have decidedly improved this year, but uncertainty and risk remain elevated, especially over the medium term. The growth of the world economy is now projected by the International Monetary Fund at 3.3% in 2013 and 4% in 2014. In the near term, policymakers in the major industrial countries have succeeded in mitigating significant threats to the economic recovery. In the United States, the risks posed by the so-called fiscal cliff have subsided, and in the European Union, the risk of a breakup of the euro area is less apparent. The IMF expects the U.S. economy to expand by just under 2% this year, followed by a stronger increase on the order of 3% in 2014. While the Eurozone economies, in contrast, could face some persistent headwinds this year because of the ongoing needs for fiscal adjustments and a strengthening of the financial sector, this region could also see some gains in 2014. While short-term challenges to global economic growth and stability have moderated, as the International Monetary Fund cautions, downside risks could remain elevated in the medium term. If there is insufficient adjustments in the Eurozone and/or the lack of comprehensive, longer-term fiscal reform and consolidation in the United States and Japan. Also, we must monitor China's transition to a slower, albeit still healthy, rate of growth over the medium term. The implications of global developments and prospects for the Bahamas are clear. In the near term, a more buoyant consumer and business sector in the United States will underpin the ongoing recovery of our economy, and especially the tourism sector. In this context, it is vitally important that we stay the course with the medium-term fiscal consolidation plan that we set out in the mid-year budget and capitalize on the near-term recovery to further strengthen our public finances. I turn to the Bahamian economy. As for the performance of the Bahamian economy, the Department of Statistics recently reported that the expansion of real GDP continued on a stable, though still modest, course in 2012. The economy grew by 1.8% in real terms last year, in line with the 1.7% growth registered in 2011, but below the 2.5% rate projected in the 2012-13 budget communication. That clearly has had significant negative implications for the government's recurrent revenue collections, as was highlighted in the mid-year budget statement. Mr. Speaker, the bright spots in economic performance have continued to be tourism and construction. Tourism continues to record steady gains on the basis of growth in key source markets and recovery in the group business segment, along with buoyant sea arrivals. The incentive programs offered by the hotel sector have also made a valuable contribution. Output in the construction sector was buoyed last year by both foreign investment activity and public sector investment projects. The former was again dominated by the large Bahamas resort project. In contrast, private sector construction activity remained relatively subdued, reflecting both the modest pace of economic recovery and ongoing challenging conditions in the mortgage market. As a result of the continuing growth of the economy, employment conditions did improve somewhat in 2012. Department of Statistics survey estimates that between May and November of 2012, the national unemployment rate fell to 14% from 14.7%. That is also down 2 full points from the peak of 15.9% in November 2011. However, labor force developments in Grand Bahama and among our youth were still less encouraging and remain, therefore, areas of clear, ongoing public policy concern. It will be important that our economy achieve appreciably higher rates of growth over time in order to generate sufficient new job opportunities, particularly in these two critical areas. News on the inflation front has been somewhat more encouraging. The National Retail Price Index rose by 2.4% in the year to October, down from 2.9% the previous year. The most significant declines in price inflation were recorded in respect of transportation, restaurants and hotels, education and communications, recreation and culture. In contrast, price gains for food and non-alcoholic beverages were more significant. International oil prices stayed at elevated levels last year, and this led to higher domestic fuel costs. Gasoline and diesel prices increased by 5.4% and 6.2% respectively during the course of the year. The fuel charge assessed by the Bahamas Electricity Corporation rose by over 15% in 2012 to a level of 26.7 cents per kilowatt hour. As for the monetary and credit market developments, the domestic market continues to be that of managing the weak asset quality in an environment where both the demand and supply for credit remain soft. Honorable members will observe from the Central Bank report that the stock of private sector loans that are in arrears rose further in 2012, albeit at a much more tempered pace. Hence, new instances of credit distress are abating. However, on a more worrisome note, borrowers who are already in arrears are slipping further and further behind with their commitments. This is the impetus behind our thrust to better define the legal protection for borrowers in a heightened environment of foreclosure. This thrust, together with a strong economic base, will cause an improvement in household incomes and the ability to service credit obligations. On the balance of payments front, the key highlight is that of construction-related inflows on investment projects such as Bahamas and the fuel import bill have continued to underpin the current account deficit that widened by approximately one-third to $1.46 billion in 2012. Aside from the extraordinary impact of the BDC privatization proceeds that distorted the 2011 outcome, other net foreign capital inflows were moderately stable in 2012 relative to 2011. However, with the increased import pressures, external reserves contracted by $74.6 million during the course of the year. At December 2012, external reserves stood at $810.2 million, equivalent to an estimated 17.5 weeks of non-oil merchandise imports, and down from 19.7 weeks at the end of 2011. The seasonal rebuilding in reserves began slowly in 2013, with the latest estimate through May 24th placing balances at $814.3 million. Prospects for the Bahamian economy in both 2013 and 2014 remain unchanged from the projections presented in both last year's budget communication and the mid-year budget statement. The International Monetary Fund continues to forecast that our economy will expand by 2.7% in real terms this year, followed by 2.5% next year. These projections have been factored into the fiscal forecast, to which I will shortly turn. Enhancing economic growth prospects and investing in Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, one of the key pillars of our agenda for change relates to our commitment to stimulate sustained economic growth in the years ahead. It goes without saying that as a prerequisite, we must have a safe and secure environment for both our citizens and visitors. I want to reiterate at this time my government's unflinching commitment to do whatever is necessary to reduce crime, the fear of crime, and guarantee law and order in our society. Through Project Safe Bahamas, we will continue to address this urgent matter by a fully integrated approach involving prevention, detection, prosecution, and rehabilitation. The agencies involved include the police, urban renewal, social services, education, housing, health, and the Office of the Attorney General to ensure that we attack the fundamental underlying causes of crime and fundamental underlying causes of violence, and to promote law and order. Crime generally is trending downward, but we have much more work to do. Many measures are being implemented by the police, the Defense Force, and the Office of the Attorney General. I wish to highlight that the government is allocating $2 million in this budget for the acquisition of new police vehicles in the coming fiscal year. This permits the round-the-clock presence of the police on our streets to be seen and to be felt. Another portion of our citizen security program that citizens will have noted is the installation of CCTV in the downtown and over-the-hill areas. This program will continue to expand in the next fiscal year. Between 2012-2013 and 2013-2014, we will have allocated in excess of $8 million to the police force to allow it to increase its manpower complement by over 450 officers. More specifically, in the next fiscal year, the force will more than triple the size of its recruitment and training class to 100 officers from the usual complement of 30. As well as we will begin a 5-year process to invest approximately $175 million in the modernization of the marine fleet and harbor facilities of the Defense Force in order to better patrol our seas and borders, protect our marine resources, and strengthen our capacity to respond to natural disasters throughout the Family Islands. In addition, we have also invested considerable sums to increase the manpower of the Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, Swift Justice has been re-implemented successfully, and it is having an impact. Before the end of the year, we will announce initiatives that will further expedite matters being heard before the courts. The broad thrust of the government's growth strategy includes diversifying the key tourism and financial services industries, as well as the overall economy, partly through the promotion of innovation in high-value added products. We also seek to foster linkages between sectors and to identify and remove impediments to growth, particularly in the business environment. Ministers responsible will speak more about this key strategy during the budget debate. More specifically, in the tourism area, the government is allocating $10 million in 2013-2014 to marketing the new Bahamas resort development at Cable Beach, as well as other properties on Cable Beach. As well, we are pursuing an expansion of airlift into the Bahamas. We are also targeting opportunities in the areas of medical research, sports, heritage, and religious tourism. The government is developing stem cell legislation as a means of further promoting medical research tourism. While the government does attach a high priority to identifying, promoting, and supporting new foreign direct investment projects, we are also cognizant of the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises that are important engines of growth and job creation. We are therefore developing a new policy framework that will enhance the creation and expansion of small and medium-sized enterprises and the long-term employment opportunities that they create. The consultation report on the draft legislation is scheduled to be presented to the government in June, and the amended legislation will be released for consultations in early summer, with tabling in Parliament is expected this fall. We are also striving to enhance the business environment through a variety of initiatives that will improve the business-government interface. These will include further expansion of the e-government platform for a number of government programs and services, including the e-submission of declarations to Customs as of June 1st, the e-submission of correspondence to the Ministry of Finance as of July, and the e-submission of requests for exemptions as of August. Reforms are also underway to make key government agencies more customer-friendly and their services more easily accessible. E-efforts have been focused in the areas of modernization of the Customs Department, enhancements to the suite of business license services, and services at the Registrar General's Department, as well as reforms to real property tax administration. Specific initiatives for growth are also being developed in respect of aircraft and yacht registries and an arbitration center in Grand Bahama. All of these are in advanced stages of discussion and development. In this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, the government will begin investments in a number of priority areas. As an immediate measure, we have allocated $10 million to the capital budget of the Ministry of Works and Urban Development for urban renewal small home repairs. This program will benefit small contractors and provide jobs targeting our young males. It will support much needed improvement in the substandard housing conditions which many of the poor among us endure. My government continues to emphasize its commitment to higher educational standards and better outcomes, as well as more effective skills training, all of which are also vitally important to the future. My government has allocated, in the context of the country's strategy agreed with the Caribbean Development Bank, over $30 million for education, and this will be primarily directed towards special education and the transition of the College of the Bahamas to university status. In this budget, my government is also allocating $5.5 million of our own resources to the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology in 2012-2014 for the construction of new primary and secondary schools in Inagua, San Salvador, Gregory Town, and Los San Andres. Mr. Speaker, that is more than double the amount allocated last year and a virtual tripling of the sums allocated in 2011-2012. We will maintain and expand these investments in future years. As part of our broader education thrust, Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to announce that the government will rent and renovate Our Lady's Catholic Primary School to accommodate some 100 special needs children. Further recognizing the need for heightened attention to those with special needs, it is equally a pleasurable experience for me to indicate that my government also plans to begin construction in New Providence of a new educational and multi-purpose facility for persons with special needs. We are also committed to providing facilities in our schools for persons with special needs. In addition, we want to ensure that when they are no longer able to attend schools like Garventines, for example, facilities such as the one to be developed and provided where they may attend during the day, Mr. Speaker, will be introduced. Mr. Speaker, this will be planned in conjunction with the NGOs like the Organizations for Reach and Down Syndrome, other disabled organizations. But this facility will provide for them to continue their development and maximize their potential and ability to contribute to society, as well as the transformative effect on this section of our community. We believe that scores of families will welcome the opportunity to pursue business and gainful employment while their loved ones are in a safe environment developing fully their God-given potential. Mr. Speaker, put very simply, that means children like the one I have. The fear of every parent. If something happens to me, what will happen to them? We are going to remove that fear from the Bahamian parents and extend it into the islands as our resources allow. Mr. Speaker, again, this is only the beginning, as our public education system must become more inclusive in meeting the needs of students of all abilities throughout the Bahamas. In the area of health, I wish to signal that the government is currently reviewing all aspects, including costing of a national health insurance program. We are committed to the establishment of such a scheme during this term, and through the review process, we will determine how best to phase in this program in the period ahead. We are also committed to the construction of many hospitals across the nation. Currently, 2 such hospitals are on the drawing board in South Eleuthera and Cat Island, and construction is slated to begin in 2013-2014. Mr. Speaker, my government remains committed to the housing program. The grave economic situation that we inherited has delayed our ability to proceed as expeditiously as we would have liked. But we are now in a position to move forward with the construction of new homes. The Minister of Housing will provide additional details during the budget debate. As well, Mr. Speaker, the government will invest just over $4 million next year to establish, I better start over again, because I've been waiting for this one for a long time. Let me say it the right way. Mr. Speaker, the government, this government, will invest just over $4 million next year to establish the new School of Agriculture and Marine Sciences in North Angeles. To be built on the site of the old agricultural research facility, the institute will include a tutorial commercial farm and is projected to be fully self-sustaining within 5 years.
Yes, sir.
As an adjunct to the College of the Bahamas, it will offer diploma and certification programs as well as skills training, and its curriculum will combine both academic and practical components. It is estimated that initiatives sparked by the school could potentially place a 15% dent in our total food imports.
Yes,
I am sure the member for South Abaco is sense of exhilaration might be the right way. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the government will begin the process. I got to say this one again too. This is important. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the government will begin the process of investing some $10 million in the construction of multi-purpose sporting facilities in the Family Islands that will that will give young athletes in these communities the opportunities to develop in competitive sports on a similar basis as those in New Providence and Grand Bahamas. So say ye.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, there we go.
In New Providence, Mr. Speaker, the new National Training Agency will come into operation. The mandate of the agency is to equip Bahamians with the necessary practical competencies and skills to meet the current and future demands of the workplace. That is, equipping our unemployed citizens to become more employable in the growth sectors of our economy. The agency will provide both training for jobs coming on stream and placement assistance to workers in finding employment. Mr. Speaker, this is where we must not compromise in moving forward with integrating our immigration policies into our labor policies, into our training agency, Mr. Speaker, and to hope that employers are enlightened in their approach and will be collaborating with the government in that approach. We will also, Mr. Speaker, begin through public and private sector partnerships to work on the development of a major week-long national cultural festival. I better say this again, too.
Yes, sir.
So I can say this right.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, and I say this in the context of having an incredible experience in Junkanoo, but this is different. We will begin the process through private and public sector partnerships of working on the development of a major week-long national cultural festival oriented to the start of the Lenten season. This will mark the start of a Bahamian Carnival or Mardi Gras. The budget allocates $1 million to this initiative next year. The festival is targeted for startup in 2015 and could incorporate a cultural village, public processions, and song competitions, costume competitions. We believe that this stimulus to Bahamian music, art, entertainment, and other cultural forms will reap inestimable rewards for generations to come. Various groups, Mr. Speaker, similar to the Saxons, Valley Boys, and other Junkanoo groups, would be led into becoming corporate entities.
One family.
These entered one family. One family. One family. Spanish Wells and Harbor Island. These entities, Mr. Speaker, officially in the business of cultural tourism, would be selling costumes, including online sales, both here and abroad. There will be specific stipulations that a certain percentage of the contents of costumes will be made of straw and sisal. Such stipulations would stimulate and provide a much-needed boost to those domestic industries.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt whatsoever that we can foreshadow a burst of entrepreneurship from cultural tourism, including costume design and creation, writing and performance of music, dance and choreography, visual arts, lighting, stage design, and the protection of the intellectual property emanating from this arena. And you will find, Mr. Speaker, that thousands of people will fly into the Bahamas for this occasion.
Yes, sir.
It also gives leaders in the Junkanoo community an opportunity to be full-time in a corporate enterprise, Mr. Speaker, year-round, and hiring all the people who will design these costumes and make these costumes and sell these costumes in a very entrepreneurial way.
Yes, sir.
I can't wait to see the leader of opposition playing mass in this regard. No, you got to buy it. Mr. Speaker, that's why you say costume for $2.70. Mr. Speaker, I'm in the process of making a communication. We also note, Mr. Speaker, with respect to this carnival, this festival, this Mardi Gras, by whatever name we end up calling it, we note that crime statistics decreasing during the Junkanoo months. Junkanoo promotes teamwork and teaches compromise and other important social skills. Yes, sir. There is discipline inculcated in the practice of Junkanoo. We believe that these same benefits can be transposed to the pre-Lenten Mardi Gras or Carnival that will begin in 2015 in this country. Speaker, I want to go further. Once fully operational, the festival is expected to provide a significant boost to our tourism sector. It will also create hundreds of full-time employment opportunities for persons engaged in the design and fabrication of carnival costumes. As an example of successful public and private sector partnering, I would signal, Mr. Speaker, the new development in Bimini, which is now in full swing. A private sector cruise ship will be dedicated exclusively to that island to provide a steady flow of visitors. I believe that cruise ship has now crossed the Atlantic and is in the shipyard at Grand Bahama being refurbished for launching in July. But that cruise ship will ply between Florida and Bimini daily, twice a day, and giving Biminites the privilege of being able to travel at a very, very cheap rate, Mr. Speaker, to be told to them at a future date between Miami and Bimini. Mr. Speaker, there are also significant airport and port expansions in the make, Mr. Speaker, that we will be, and the minister responsible will be speaking to. In all, we are looking at the transformation of both North and South Bimini, with the people of Bimini being fully involved in that process. This is a very concrete example of the progress that we are making, and not only a wishful hope. This exists, it's happening now, and we will be able to see it and touch it. Mr. Speaker, we expect hundreds of jobs to be created by July and August, Mr. Speaker, when the casino opens and other businesses open to support that. So this, Mr. Speaker, is a reality that exists. I would also emphasize that throughout the process, we have taken all necessary steps to protect the environment. Mr. Speaker, a proposal for Cat Island, with again hundreds of new potential new jobs, is under consideration, very active consideration. In fact, I think we are at the stage in that where we only have to settle the provision of water and formally and the airport, Mr. Speaker, and then it is all to the races. Mr. Speaker, something that again is very significant to us as we try to stimulate the agricultural sector, we are allocating $1 million toward the installation of greenhouses for gardening purposes at the prison, schools, and special education facilities, the William A. Pratt and Simpson Penn Centers, seniors, and their children's homes throughout our country, as well as in urban renewal communities as a means of providing employment and a source of marketable produce. And Mr. Speaker, this will be done immediately and will be in existence immediately, and I can't wait to see the kind of connection that the people, whoever they are, wherever they are in these institutions and in the community. In fact, the properties in Bain towns have already been selected, and the numbers of people who will be hired to facilitate that development in the urban renewal context has been identified. So, Mr. Speaker, the government remains acutely mindful of the plight of the more needy members of our society. Even as we tighten up on our expenditure allocations, we have sustained our commitment to social assistance transfers to individuals in need through the Ministry of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, I turn to medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. As for our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, it is a comprehensive and multifaceted, covering both recurrent expenditure and recurrent revenue. As I have stated, we must arrest the deteriorating state of the public finances. There must therefore be an unwavering commitment to this process. I will provide additional details in this communication on progress to date and plans for the future. In terms of measures to significantly and structurally enhance recurrent revenues, Mr. Speaker, we are implementing a fundamental reform of our tax system, including the introduction of a value-added tax in July 2014. We are steadily proceeding with the establishment of the new Central Revenue Agency. We are continuing to pursue a thorough and comprehensive reform and modernization of the real property tax system. We are advancing our program to modernize the Customs Department, and we are moving ahead with the plan to introduce the new excise stamps for tobacco products as a means of significantly curtailing revenue leakage in that area. As for recurrent expenditure, Mr. Speaker, we are bringing the new Financial Administration and Audit Act fully into force on July 1st, 2013. We are in the process of restructuring the Ministry of Finance. I want to say it again. We are in the process of restructuring the Ministry of Finance such that it is better positioned to effectively monitor the operations and expenditures of all ministries, departments, and public corporations. We are taking specific actions to deal with electricity consumption, communication costs, and the management of government assets and motor vehicles, specifically across all areas of government. And we are closer to implementing the new framework to govern new public sector procurement. I will now turn to supplementary details on a number of these major new initiatives that are central components of our near-term and medium-term fiscal consolidation strategy. Mr. Speaker, with respect to tax reform and value-added tax, earlier this year, the government released a white paper on tax reform whose overriding objectives are to secure an adequate revenue base in support of our medium-term fiscal consolidation targets, while promoting enhanced efficiency and growth of the domestic economy. The cornerstone of that reform plan is the introduction of a value-added tax on July 1st, 2014, along with concurrent reductions in both imports, duties, and excise taxes. Internally, the government is now reviewing the draft VAT legislation. This document will be released for public review and consultations by early summer, with a view to tabling and passing in Parliament by the end of 2013. We have begun the process of public consultations, which will intensify over the summer months, leading to an updated paper on the government's policy stance on the VAT framework. The government is very mindful that the various stakeholder groups, it would be imprudent, though, for me, as Minister of Finance, to give commitments to any group which could collectively undermine the importance of this reform process to strengthen our revenue base. At the same time, the government is mindful and will move cautiously to maintain the Bahamas' external competitiveness. We are also committed to mitigating the impact of VAT on the poor, and have commissioned a study to quantify these effects with the view of having adequate protection provided through our social safety net system. I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, we are not in any circumstances going to compromise on our commitment to the most disadvantaged in our country. You can rest assured of that fact. Mr. Speaker, as has been amply documented, the real property tax system suffers from many critical structural defects, And as a result, revenues generated by the system fall significantly short of the amounts that should rightfully be collected. Specific reforms have been developed which could significantly increase property tax revenues. Our reform process is continuing, and in this particular budget, we have included a legislative amendment to increase the coverage of the property tax roll. We will also modernize the information technology system supporting the administration of the tax and equip the staff of the Real Property Tax Division unit to undertake computer-assisted mass appraisals. These various reform initiatives are comprehensive, and through their implementation, the RPT system will be considerably improved in respect of both taxpayer services and revenue collections. During his contribution, the Minister of State will give more information on these initiatives, including an update on the results of the RPT amnesty program. Reform of customs operations. The government has also initiated a major transformation of the Customs Department with the assistance of the Inter-American Development Bank, which is focused on strengthening both customs management and customs operations. The overriding objective of this exercise is to improve the facilitation of trade and to strengthen customs' ability to collect revenue and protect the borders. As part of client services enhancement as of June the 1st, all large importers in New Providence will be required to file customs declarations electronically. This will streamline the customs clearance process and begin to free up resources for deployment elsewhere in customs operations. The new Customs Management Act will take effect as of July 1st, 2013. This will provide a modern legal framework for customs operations in line with international standards. The new Excise Stamp Control Act, which was recently passed by Parliament, provides for the stamping of all tobacco products, whether imported or produced domestically, upon the payment of the appropriate excise tax. This measure will significantly reduce the smuggling of tobacco products and provide considerable benefit in terms of reducing revenue leakage. By January 1st, 2014, the system will be fully operational with a transition to the use of excise stamps beginning later this year. Mr. Speaker, the new Financial Administration and Audit Act. Mr. Speaker, sound public financial management is a vital component of good governance, which in turn is critical to securing a vibrant democracy and supporting a buoyant economic growth and employment creation. When the revised Financial Administration and Audit Act comes into force on July 1st, 2013, it will enhance public sector administration, bolster transparency, accountability, and reporting, as well as strengthen control in matters of public financial management. This will be buttressed by a new public procurement framework to be brought into place before the end of 2013 that will reduce and contain the cost of purchases of goods and services within the public sector, including public corporations. In February, I stressed the importance of the Ministry of Finance becoming more intrusive in the management of the government's finances. In addition to the overarching frameworks for controls, for the first time, external monitors will be deployed to scrutinize the expenditure behavior of large cost centers in government ministries, departments, and even public corporations. So said, so done. Review, Mr. Speaker, of all revenue areas. Mr. Speaker, the timing is never just right to ask taxpayers to contribute more to the coffers of the government. Yet, we cannot allow the government to retreat from its obligations to provide and maintain public services. There is a cost to providing services that must be adequately financed, and there is a standard at which services must be delivered, which correlates with what we are asking taxpayers to pay. Indeed, in many instances, the demands on government and the standards to which we are being held have risen without concurrent changes in the fees attached to such services. In the mid-year statement, we announced that we would undertake comprehensive review and assessment of all government revenue areas with a view to identifying means of enhancing government revenue collections going forward, but also to align these better to the cost of these services. We also pledged, Mr. Speaker, to thoroughly review the entire structure of excise tax rates on motor vehicles while bearing in mind the traffic and environmental implications. That review exercise is almost complete. The administrative measures and changes that we are advancing at this time are summarized in Annex C of this communication. The government will conclude this review over the next 2 months and will include a scrutiny of immigration fees, port charges, motor vehicle charges, and a revisiting of the range of fee structures and rates in the tourism and transportation sectors to bring them up to market levels. As well, given the heavy fiscal costs, it will be incumbent on us to reassess the entire range of fiscal incentives provided by government to private sector enterprises, and that is the extent to which we incentivize the tourism industry through cash allocations and grants. These reviews will include discussions with concerned private sector stakeholders. In addition, we will seek to establish a framework for the development of public-private sector partnerships for investments in public infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that the revenue enhancements flowing from these tax and fee adjustments must, in the near term, contribute to keeping us on track with the fiscal objectives of our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. I will also stress that these adjustments follow a lengthy period during which fees remained unchanged and fell out of line with the costs of providing the services that they cover. In future, it will be important to subject all fees to a process of regular review and needed adjustments. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I will signal some of the more significant adjustments that are now being proposed as follows. Mr. Speaker, the structure of excise tax rates on motor vehicles remain fundamentally unchanged, but the basis for the assessment of tax is being reversed from engine size to a 3-tier scale of the value of the vehicle. Excise tax on cigarettes and cigarillos will move from an ad valorem rate based on value to a specific rate per stick to counter fraudulent customs declarations and disincentivize substandard imports that could have more damaging health consequences. Per stick. Mr. Speaker, a number of tariff rates are being reduced. A number of tariff rates are being reduced to provide additional relief to certain products used for medical reasons, such as defibrillators. For environmental reasons, we are aligning the tariff rate on inverters for solar panels to 0. And we're doing so in line with the new duty-free treatment for solar panels, and the duty on LED appliances is being eliminated to bring it in line with the treatment of LED light bulbs. Government corporations, Mr. Speaker, such as Nassau Airport Development, BEC, and the Bridge Authority will also now be subject to business license tax as a means of enforcing greater discipline on resource usage within these entities. As a most important change, however, BEC will again be exempt from excise tax on fuel imports as a means of providing relief on electricity costs, which are projected Mr. Speaker, which are projected to decline by 6.6% as a result of that measure. In this regard, I would stress that we are undertaking a critical examination of all energy proposals that we have received, such as that in respect of waste energy, such that we can move forward expeditiously with measures to reduce energy costs in this country. Mr. Speaker, we are also proposing to eliminate stamp tax on electronic banking payments, including the use of debit cards for point of sale and online transactions. Mr. Speaker, the stamp tax exemption granted to first-time homeowners will be extended for an additional 5 years to June 2018. And, Mr. Speaker, within the $500,000 cap, flexibility will be permitted as to the proportions allocated to the conveyance and the mortgage. So we're removing the contradiction that existed, Mr. Speaker, as to whether you get exemption on the conveyance and don't get exemption on the mortgage. Mr. Speaker, both the City of Nassau Revitalization Act and the Family Island Development Encouragement Act will be extended for another year to 2014. Mr. Speaker, the business license fee regime, which is based on sales or turnover, is also being simplified with the elimination of most special rate categories, an adjustment in the maximum rates paid by larger firms, and a consolidated treatment of parent companies and subsidiaries. In the financial services sector, Mr. Speaker, a new business license fee is being introduced for domestic banks at the rate of 3% of gross revenue, and a two-year phased adjustment is proposed for the fees on offshore banks and trust companies. With these adjustments, Mr. Speaker, we are also retaining the existing assets fee, base fee paid by domestic banks. These inflows will collectively increase the means for the government to directly fund costs incurred by the group of financial services regulators. After having been at current levels for many years, stamp duties on imported spirits are being increased. We are also eliminating the $10 stamp tax levied on customs entries and introducing a 1% customs processing fee on all entries, subject to a minimum fee of $10 and a maximum fee of $500. We are introducing a customs processing fee schedule for manifests and other declarations for inbound and outbound aircraft and vessels. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that in all of these instances, we are recovering the administrative costs involved for customs in providing these services. In the case of Grand Bahama, the government will, in 2015, also have to assume the cost for security and border control services at the container port now being done by the United States of America. We also propose, Mr. Speaker, to amend the Stamp Act such that stamp tax will be applied when Bahamian dollar dividends or profits are converted for repatriation out of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to fiscal performances in the 2012-2013 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, at the time of the mid-year budget statement, I explained that the performance of recurrent revenues in 2012-2013 was not as robust as had been expected at the time of the last budget because of weaker than projected growth of nominal GDP. That weakness has persisted, and we are now expecting recurrent revenues this year to come in at 1.380 million, 1,380 million, down by 11%, or 170 million from the 1,550 million budget projection. On the basis of that weakness, I announced in the statement that the government would implement a number of near-term internal adjustments to ensure that we meet the budget GFS deficit target of 6.5% of GDP in 2012-2013. Through those measures, Mr. Speaker, we would have succeeded in containing recurrent expenditure in 2012-2013 to an estimated level of 1,659 million, down by 162 million from last year's budget projection. Capital expenditure, Mr. Speaker, should end up in the region of $350 million, down by 50 million from the budget estimate.
Yes, sir.
With these adjustments, the GFS deficit this fiscal year should approximate 6.1% of GDP, slightly below the budget forecast of 6.5%, Mr. Speaker. Even the leader of the opposition will say we're doing good.
He knows that.
Mr. Speaker, I'd want to move to fiscal policy 2012-2014 and beyond. In the February 2013-2014 and beyond, in the February mid-year budget statement, I clearly enunciated the medium-term fiscal strategy of the government going forward. And this budget is faithful to the attainment of the fiscal targets of that plan. In 2013-14 fiscal year, recurrent expenditure is being held to a level of $1,730 million, just below the level set out in the mid-year statement. Likewise, capital expenditure next year will be contained to a level of $295 million, not significantly changed from the $300 million projected in February, Mr. Speaker. I would mention in this context that we expect investment in public infrastructure to be bolstered in the period ahead by the public-private partnerships to which I referred earlier. I would also signal, Mr. Speaker, that the government will engage in roadwork projects across the Family Islands in the coming year, including, in particular, Abaco, Andros, Acklins, as well as others. Mr. Speaker, recurrent revenues in 2013 to 14 will be enhanced by the ongoing projected modest growth of nominal GDP. They will also be bolstered by the various revenue adjustments and enhancements measures that I have announced in this communication. On the basis of the measures that I have outlined, recurrent revenues in 2013 to 2014 are projected at $1,503 million, still leaving, Mr. Speaker, a gap from the forecast of $1,580 million. That was set out in February. Honourable members, I would draw to honourable members' attention, Mr. Speaker, that they should see this gap as an indication of the additional measures which I have not outlined in this communication, but which must of necessity be identified and approved by Parliament in the coming months as a means of bridging the gap. And Mr. Speaker, I expect that I'm not budgeting dynamic development in some of our islands. But notwithstanding that, my government will move, Mr. Speaker, in consultation with stakeholders to examine these areas that are sources of revenue and to be able to report to Parliament on our outcome as we go on. As it stands, the GFS deficit next year will reach $443 million, or 5.1% of GDP, as compared to the estimated outcome of 6.1% of GDP this year. The central components of the medium-term plan in respect of recurrent and capital expenditure and recurrent revenue will continue to engage beyond 2013-2014. As I stated in the mid-year budget statement, we will continue to exert discipline on recurrent and capital expenditure such that the levels of both continue to decline as a proportion of GDP. As for the recurrent revenue, the tax reform package that we announced in the February white paper, as well as the ongoing structural enhancements to revenue administration that I reviewed earlier, will contribute to a significant improvement in the revenue yield of our tax system to a level more in line with norms in the region. As a consequence, Mr. Speaker, and barring unforeseen developments, we expect to be able to adhere to the fiscal objectives of our medium-term plan, namely, both the deficit on recurrent account and GFS deficit being eradicated by 2015 to 16, the primary deficit being eliminated by 2014 to 15, and that is critical to reversing the upward trend in the debt to GDP ratio. Government debt, by our estimations, will return to a level in the area of 50% of GDP by 2016-2017, as opposed to a level approaching 70% in the absence of our decisive action plan to redress public finances. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I would stress again for honourable members the critical importance to the betterment of Bahamian society and our standard of living of the government's aggressive action plan to redress the public finances. We quite simply have no alternative course of action if government is to have access to resources needed to implement the vital program of change we pledge to deliver. We have been aggressive in pursuing additional revenue and reining in expenditures, and that is reflected in the better than forecast performance in respect of the GFS deficit this fiscal year. Right. The record speaks for itself. As evidenced by the measures announced in this budget, we remain assiduous on the path of fiscal transformation. The beneficial results of our plan are beginning to emerge in terms of economic recovery and employment, and these will continue to strengthen through the various initiatives in my government's proactive growth strategy. This budget, Mr. Speaker, begins a process of generational change to transform and modernize government operations as a means of enhancing the efficiency, effectiveness, and sustainability of our public services.
Yes, sir.
We are also embarked on an unprecedented reform of the government's revenue system to bring its administration up to 21st century standards and its yield up to levels more in line with the needs of modern governance. Mr. Speaker, to some people, to some Bahamians, these challenges may seem daunting indeed. Addressing them clearly requires commitment, persistence, and fortitude. Sir. I want to reassure members and the Bahamian public that my government will not shirk the fundamental responsibility that it bears, and that we are fully up to the task of bringing about a better economic and social outcome for all Bahamians. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am obliged. I was flying through the night from Trinidad, getting in just after 1 this morning and skirting all around these weather patterns on a flight. So I'm so happy that in these last 24 hours I've been able to rely on colleagues in government as I represented the country with the Foreign Minister and Minister of Financial Services. So this is indeed a happy occasion for me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Right Honourable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Ordered that the communication do lie on the table.
Thanks. When this goes. When do we do this?
Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Right Honourable Member for Centerville.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to lay on the table the 2013-2014 draft estimates of revenue and expenditure for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Right Honourable Member. Ordered that the documents be brought up. You signed it, yes. Ordered that the estimates and documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House copies of the following: the Customs Management Regulations 2013, the Passenger Tax Act Amendment to First Schedule Order 2013, the Family Island Development Encouragement Extension of Time Order 2013, and the City of Nassau Revitalization Extension of Time Order 2013.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
One moment. Mr. Speaker,
Mic, please. Oh, fine.
I beg leave to lay on the table of the House copies of the following: the Explosive Amendment Regulations 2013, the Garage Licensing Amendment Regulations 2013, the Building Regulations General Amendment Rules 2013, the Liquefied Petroleum Gas Amendment Regulations, 2013.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the documents be brought up.
Yeah.
Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Thanks. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Angliston.
you still doing? Oh, sorry.
The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and South Salvador.
I beg leave to lay on the table the Firearms Forms and Fees Amendment Rules 2013, the Police Force Fees for Services Regulations 2013.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the documents be brought up. In order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Angliston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House copies of the following: the Merchant Shipping Maritime Labor Convention Regulations 2012 and the Merchant Shipping Amendment to First Schedule Notice 2012.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the documents be brought up.
What's the date today? What's the date? 8? No, I ain't doing the other one.
Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Fox Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Immigration Attendance and Other Fees Regulations 2013 and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Amendment Act 2012, Appointed Day Notice 2013.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further statements, further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Environmental Health Services Collection and Disposal of Waste Amendment Regulations 2013.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the documents be brought up. And ordered that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Central and South Eleuthera.
I beg leave, Mr. Speaker, to lay on the table of the House the copies of the following documents: the Maritime Marriage Amendment to Second Schedule Rules 2013, the Interpretation of General Clauses Act, Delegation of Powers of the Registrar General Notice 2013.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the documents be brought up.
Thank you.
Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Thank you, Honourable Member. Communications by the clerk. None. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motion of leave of absence and leave to resign seat and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st July 2013 and ending 30th of June 2014.
Thank you, honorable members. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2013 and ending the 30th of June 2014. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2013 and ending 30th of June 2014.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act for the appropriation for the sum of $295,190,261 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th of June 2014.
Wait a minute.
Thank you, honourable members. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $295,190,261 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital developments for the financial year ending the 30th of June 2014. As many are in favor that the bill be read a first time will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $295,190,261 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th of June 2014.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act.
It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act. As many are in favor that the bill be read a first time will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act. As many are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Business License Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act. As many in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act. As many are in favor that the bill be read a first time will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Family Islands Development Encouragement Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Family Islands Development Encouragement Act. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Family Islands Development Encouragement Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Electricity Act.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time: a bill for an act to amend the Electricity Act. As many are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Electricity Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for a first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the City of Nassau Redevelopment Act. Revitalization Act. I will repeat. A bill for an act to amend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act. As many are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Insurance Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Insurance Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds. As many are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Insurance Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund
of excess surplus funds.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Bahamas Maritime Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Bahamas Maritime Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds. As many in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Bahamas Maritime Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
Second.
Thank you, honourable members. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds. As many in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Clifton Heritage Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
Second.
Thank you, honourable members. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Clifton Heritage Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds. As many in favor that the bill be read a first time will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Clifton Heritage Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
Any further first reading of bills? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: the bill for an act to amend the Bridge Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
Second.
Thank you, honourable members. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Bridge Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds. As many in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Bridge Authority Act to provide for the payment into the Consolidated Fund of excess surplus funds.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Savings Bank Act.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time.
You don't have a bank big enough to handle your money.
A bill for an act to amend the Savings Bank Act. As many in favor will remain seated and those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time. Order, members. Order, members.
A bill for an act to amend the Savings Bank Act.
For the first reading of bills. For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And finally, and I'm sure thankfully, and just to say, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the Savings Bank Act will allow for an increase in the amount of funds that can be invested in government securities. It doesn't involve any surplus funds. But finally, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act to provide for the establishment of a public procurement department within the Ministry of Finance and for connected matters.
Thank you, honourable member. Members. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act to provide for the establishment of a public procurement department within the Ministry of Finance and for connected matters. As many are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act to provide for the establishment of a public procurement department within the Ministry of Finance and for connected matters.
Thank you.
We can go and come back to you.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act. As many in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act.
For the first reading of bills,
Mr. Speaker, I
the
beg...
chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill to amend the Police Force Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act. As many in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be introduced and read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act.
For the first reading of bills,
There are no further...
Yes.
the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
C and D. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes.
Thank you, honourable members.
They're all part of the Prime Minister. Police? Customs staff.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes. As many in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following: a bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of a bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes. As many in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes.
For the first reading of bills. House Leader. For the first reading of bills.
There are no further first readings of bills.
Thank you, honourable member. Second reading and committal of bills.
If I could have the consent of the other side. There was a document that we omitted to lay earlier.
An exigency order?
An exigency order.
That you do with hurricanes?
With the hurricanes, we just need to.
They will do
yeah.
fine, but just want to go back to...
Okay, thank you.
The member would like to vary the order of business.
I move that we revert, that the agenda be again altered so that we revert back to the laying of documents on the table, if I can obtain the consent of the...
Very well. Thank you, honourable member. Do we have a second? It is moved and seconded that the business of this House be varied to allow for laying of documents by ministers. As many in favour will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the business of this House vary for laying of documents at this time. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Ministry of Finance Declaration of Exigency Number 2, 2013. And it reads as follows. Mr. Speaker, whereas the Minister of Finance on the 28th of May, 2013, pursuant to the provisions of Item 12 of Part B of the 4th Schedule of the Tariff Act and Item 5 of Part B of the 2nd Schedule of the Excise Act, declared the following exigency to be an exigency which qualifies for the purpose of the exemption permitted under the aforesaid items, namely, the urgent need for goods specified in the schedule hereto, which the Minister is satisfied are intended for the relief of residents in New Providence who suffered loss as a result of flooding occurring on 22nd of May, 2013, and whose claims and applications in respect of such goods have been certified by the Director of the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA. The Minister of Finance hereby declares that for New Providence, the importation of goods specified in the schedule hereto are permitted for a period of 90 days commencing on the 28th of May, 2013. And under the schedule, Mr. Speaker, are building materials.
Honourable members.
Under the schedule, building materials, electrical fixtures and materials, plumbing fixtures and materials, household furniture, fixtures, furnishings and appliances, freezers and heaters, materials for cleanup or repair to property, including fences and motor vehicles. Where any abuse or misuse of goods allowed under this declaration is observed, the goods may be seized and disposed of in accordance with Section 83 of the Customs Management Act, dated this 28th of May, 2013.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the document be brought up. In order that the document do lie on the table. For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island Rumkey and San Salvador. You're yielding to the member for Kalani?
I could yield to him and then lay this document.
Very well. Very well. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Kalani.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I only wanted to thank the member for introducing the exigency order, but I would also ask the government if they can attempt to go a little further and try to encourage as much as possible for individuals to do their purchase here within the Bahamas as opposed to abroad, so as to stimulate our own economy and our business sector, especially at a time of a recession.
Thank you, Honourable Member. To note it, the chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island Rumkey and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The comments of the Leader of the Opposition is noted, and I trust that we will join forces in encouraging those who will be taking advantage of the exigency order to buy local. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act. That was foreshadowed last week by the member from Maine and Grandstown.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act.
For the first reading of bills.
There is no further reading of bills.
Very well. Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. Member statements. Appointment of select committees. Instructions to select committees. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Isles.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to give notice of the following. Whereas Article 129.1 of the Constitution requires the Minister of Finance before the end of each financial year to cause to be prepared estimates of revenue and expenditure in public services during the succeeding financial year, which shall be laid before the House of Assembly and which estimates have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas it is necessary to undertake additional borrowings to finance the deficiency of revenue over expenditure in the 2013-2014 estimates of revenue and expenditure which have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may borrow monies by the creation and issue of registered stock. And whereas from time to time the House of Assembly has approved borrowing by way of loan agreements with banks to finance approved expenditure. And whereas the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may borrow monies externally or internally in currency of the United States of America by issue and sale of bonds. And whereas by Section 18 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010, number 26 of 2010, it is provided that no loan shall be raised by the government and no guarantees involving a financial liability shall be binding upon the government unless entered into with the prior approval signified by resolution of the House of Assembly. Now be it therefore resolved that this House authorizes the Minister of Finance to raise by way of loans or loans, the sum of $465,758,763 in the aggregate in such currency as the Minister may determine. 2, authorizes the Minister to raise such loans by way of the creation and issue of stock under the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, loan agreements with banks, including commercial banks, on such terms as are mutually agreed, and C, the issue of bonds under the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382, subject to the provision that the total sum borrowed under B does not exceed the sum of $465,758,763. The House receives communication from the Minister of Finance at the earliest opportunity after the apportionment among A, B, and C. And 3, approves the proceeds of the said loans used for the purposes of defraying expenditure in the 2013-2014 estimates of revenue and expenditure in excess of revenue.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the document, the notice be brought up. Order that the notice do lie on the table. Further notices of future meetings. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, M.P. and San Salvador.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I wish to renew all notices in the name of the government side.
Very well.
And secondly, I wish to give notice that at the next meeting of the House,
members,
I or another member of the government will move for the second reading and committal, third reading and passing of all the bills that have been introduced for the first time today, except the bill to amend the International Tax Cooperation Act.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes...
And the adoption of the resolutions just read.
And the adoption of resolutions. Very well.
By the Minister of State and Finance.
Very well. Member for Golden Isles. Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Central Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to renew all matters in the name of the opposition.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House at its rising today stands adjourned to Wednesday, the 5th of June, 2013 at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Honourable Members. I should just add before we put the question that I am made to understand there's a batch of documents that are being prepared for all members. So as soon as we have reached final adjournment, if you could maintain your positions, and you will be provided with the batch of documents for today's proceedings. It has been moved and seconded the House as it's rising do adjourn until or to June 5th at 10 a.m. in the year of our Lord 2013. As many in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Adjournment. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, M.P. and San Salvador.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House now adjourn. Be adjourned.
Do we have a second?
Second. Until the 5th of May. That was already said.
And it's been stated.
Sorry. It's been stated.
If members stay focused.
Yeah.
It has been moved and seconded that the House do now adjourn. As many in favor shall stand.
All rise.
Well, the budget communication for 2013-2014, some numbers and some highlights from that presentation. Revenue down 11%. Expenditure also down, though, $62 million. Capital expenditure also down some $50 million. And the GFS deficit coming in this year at 6.1%, just a little below that 6.5 that was projected for 2013-2014. Revenue projected $1.5 billion. Expenditure $1.7 billion. Capital expenditure $295 million. Mr. Christi expects the GFS deficit to be $443 million, or 5.1% of GDP, just in line with overall projections. As he says, they expect those deficits, both recurrent and overall, to be eliminated by 2015. At the end, $465.7 million. That's a resolution that's going to be addressed when the House returns on June the 5th. Again, some highlights from that communication from Prime Minister Christi. The Bahamian economy expected to expand 2.7% 2013 and 2.5% in 2014. Let me say now that there is going to be a press conference in the majority room of the House of Assembly. Prime Minister Christi expected to further address budget issues. He'll be joined by 4 of his ministers, I am made to understand. $2 million for new police vehicles. I asked at the beginning of the show, what will happen when the police get some more money? By the way, we will tell you about those allocations as soon as that package is provided for members of the press as well as for members of Parliament. Mr. Christi saying that the government will spend some $8 million between 2012 and 2014 on the police force. They're going to change their recruitment measures. Instead of 30, they're going to be recruiting 100 at a time. And by 2014, they expect to have an additional 450 new officers in the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Mr. Christi saying it, along with everything else that we do or that a government does, there must be a safe and secure environment. $10 million for tourism marketing, including Bahamas, other properties on Cable Beach. Draft policy shortly on small and medium-sized enterprises, an expansion of e-government to make government departments and ministries more customer-friendly in the future, a yacht registry and an arbitration center planned for Grand Bahama, $10 million for small home repairs. That $10 million is going to go to the Ministry of Works and Urban Development, expected to create jobs for small businesses. $30 million to education, a new facility for special needs children, and of course, construction of hospitals in Cat Island and Eleuthera. Those are on the way. Also, $4 million next year for the School of Agriculture and Marine Science that Mr. Christi repeated, because he says he's been waiting for that for a long time. Next year in Andros, on the old agricultural site there, expected to be self-sufficient in 5 years, adjunct of the College of the Bahamas, of course. Also, it's expected that once that school gets up and going and is graduating students, it'll put a 15% dent in our food import bill, according to Mr. Christi. $10 million in this budget to begin the process of building the sporting facilities in our family islands. Very important. And of course, National Training Agency should be on stream. You remember that Agatha Marcel, the former Member of Parliament for South Beach, worked in that in the former Christi administration. My understanding is she's been engaged to head it again, and so she's actively working on that. Again, a press conference expected momentarily. Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christi, along with 4 of his ministers and others, to talk some more about what is happening with the budget. $1 million for a carnival-style festival for the Lenten season. That won't happen before 2015. Junkanoo is involved, creation of costumes, some stipulations. Sisal and straw. Of course, that should stimulate those industries, the sisal and straw industries, creating more opportunities for entrepreneurs. As the Prime Minister pointed out as well, those junkanooers, opportunity to become corporate entities, leaders of the groups, and of course, an opportunity to engage those who will build those costumes. Mr. Christie pointing out that during the junkanoo season, it's always pointed out that crime is down, meaning engage a lot of those young men, and this ought to have, if it's instituted, and he says it's going to be, should have that same positive impact for the country, certainly for the island of New Providence. Financial Administration Audit Act. In July, going to be taking a look at procurement of services, goods and services for all government ministries. And of course, there will be closer monitoring, more monitoring of expenditure. All government ministries, corporations as well, be a part of that Financial Administration and Audit Act when it is instituted. Talking about jobs in Bimini, for example, what's going to happen with the casino in July, and a dedicated cruise ship coming out of Miami into Bimini. That in July of 2014, consultations continue. They expect to table the bill and pass it by the end of 2013. So by the end of this year, they expect to do whatever they need to do to have the legal framework in place for the introduction of VAT in July of next year, just about a year from now. Also, a new Customs Act comes into force in July this year. And of course, the Customs Department being modernized, being brought into the 21st century, actually, with electronic. Excise Stamp Act, June of 2014. Of course, that has something to do with the importation of tobacco products and the intention of the government to plug the loopholes where people have been, there's been leakage of revenue, and people have been quite plainly defrauding the government of much needed revenue. Also, the government is working on, they've caused people to work on creating a framework for a partnership between private and public sector for investments in public infrastructure. Again, something we expect to hear about shortly. And also, this is something that you want to know. They're going to revisit those charges from immigration and port, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to the majority room where we're going to join that press conference.
The foundations of the economy to secure steady growth and private sector employment creation. In this way, we are positioning my government to have the resources with which to implement over the full course of our mandate initiatives that will strengthen law and order, promote stronger growth and job creation, and solidify our firm commitment to maintaining and reforming our social safety net for the effective delivery of relief to the disadvantaged and needy in our midst. The objectives of the budget cannot be more clear. It takes into account the fiscal realities which face the country, but it also recognizes that there must be a strong growth strategy to put people back to work, to foster a climate of investment and entrepreneurship, to train the workforce for the challenges to come, to strengthen the social safety net for the disadvantaged, and to ensure that there is law and order on the ground. When you go through what we have done, you will see that we have carefully crafted our way through the financial pitfalls and come up with the best of all worlds in a difficult time. We will no doubt hear from the merchants of gloom and doom that this is wrong or that is wrong or that this was not done or the next thing was not done. But by any objective measure, the dispassionate will see that the revenue enhancement measures will not crimp the economy, but will provide a more equitable tax burden. We must address the issue of fiscal responsibility and thus the revenue enhancement measures. However, we are most careful not to increase the tax burden on the disadvantaged Bahamians. We are especially concerned about getting work for our people, especially our young people. Thus, you see in this budget extensive provisions for the National Training Agency and its programs. You also see that there are substantial provisions for the building of schools and for the work of education generally in the country. In this regard, the budget statement says the following, quote, "My government continues to emphasize its commitment to higher educational standards and better outcomes, as well as more effective skills training, all of which are so vitally important to the future. My government has allocated, in the context of the country strategy agreed with the Caribbean Development Bank, over $30 million for education, and this will be primarily directed towards special education and the transition of the College of the Bahamas to university status. In this budget, my government is also allocating $5.5 million of our own resources to the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology in 2013-2014 for the construction of new primary and secondary schools in Inagua, San Salvador, Gregorytown, Eleuthera, and Los San Andres. That is more than double the amount allocated last year and a virtual tripling of the sums allocated in 2011-2012. We will maintain and expand these investments in future years. As part of our broader education thrust, the government will rent and renovate Our Lady's Catholic Primary School to accommodate some 100 special needs children," end quote. It is clear that the priority for the government continues to be education. We continue to believe that this is the key to so many of the other issues that confront us. We expect that there will be significant growth in tourism, and so we have allocated resources in anticipation of the opening up of the Bahamas project, developments in Freeport, and throughout the Family Islands, particularly in Bimini, San Salvador, and Exuma. On the question of law and order, there are more specific provisions for more boots on the ground by the hiring of more police and immigration officers in the country over the next fiscal year. There is no question that the country will have to continue to shepherd its resources carefully, but we intend to work hard at that task. Our eyes are on creating successes for job creation with special emphasis on entrepreneurship. At all times, however, we are careful to remember that it is the least of those amongst us that will need our help, and so we have in this budget struck the right balance between growth and discipline and between aid and support. I support this budget along with my colleagues and pledge to work during the year to see its successful implementation. My colleagues who join me are happy to answer any of your questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Is the current budget, is it trying to encourage Bahamians to spend more money at home? I guess in wake of the budget constraints?
Well, I think what you see in the approach in this budget is an attempt by the government to cause the further development of a number of domestic industries, which would cause Bahamians to spend more at home. We heard the discussion of the Mardi Gras Festival matter, which is a concerted effort to have a bedrock foundation event for the development of our creative industries here at home. We heard about the agricultural school and the concentration on matters related to farming and agriculture, which is a concerted effort to further develop a domestic agricultural industry which will cause Bahamians to spend more at home. We see that as well in the sporting elements, and once you have a domestic sporting business. We call it the business of sports, with the new facilities and the promotion elements. Those are Bahamian new business persons and new industry, which will also cause more to be spent at home. So we have a concerted belief that by investing in these new industry areas domestically in our country, it will also cause for new economic activity to occur within our borders at home. So we feel comfortable that this is a balanced budget presentation that takes into consideration the fiscal realities that we face, but also investment in new industry, providing new opportunities for Bahamians to both be entrepreneurs, to be properly trained, and to have more of an impact tangibly in the economic development of the country.
Mr. Hudson, just to be clear, can you let us know how much the government is going to be borrowing in the new budget?
In this, we introduced a resolution for to borrow $465 million.
The African
Well, with the intent of the Arbitration Center in Grand Bahama, it's to cause for more diversification within our professional services industry, especially in Grand Bahama. And we look to link the Grand Bahama operations of the Arbitration Center to the robust maritime industry and shipping industry that, and trade industry that is happening in Grand Bahama, where we leverage one of our expertise in Grand Bahama with a new professional services dynamic that's going to help the legal profession, all professional services professions in the country, and really provide that stimulus, we believe, to Grand Bahama.
If I can just add to, just do a follow-up to the answer to the question, we introduced a resolution to borrow $465 million, which we are happy to say is down from the 500 plus that we had to do last year. As you know, we have introduced, and in the budget presentation last year, the midterm budget and this budget, a medium-term strategy where we are gradually consolidating and putting our finances on a better footing. It's a gradual process. We have to do it gradually so that we do not put too much shocks into the economy. And so while we are borrowing additional funds, we're happy that we are moving in the direction where we are borrowing less, and we look forward to when we have successfully implemented this budget and we go into the next budget, the number that we do next year will be even lower.
I just wondered, since this is a live input, whether each of you can just speak to your specific responsibilities.
Yeah, just so far as it relates to the National Training Agency, I think all of us will be aware of the shortage of skills that we have in the country. And so what we have spoken about from before we were elected is properly preparing the workforce to take advantage of all of the opportunities that will become available through all of our major developments. And so the National Training Agency is a major thrust of this government, where we are looking at building competency and capacity in the country. And so we have been meeting with the employers' representatives, employees' representatives over the past several months. And we are well on schedule to take in our first group of trainees, hopefully in late June, early July. As you're aware, Bahama alone requires some 4,500 employees. That doesn't take into consideration the other employees required in all of the other developments throughout the country. And so we want to make sure that there is a little case to be made for bringing in foreign laborers in the country. And that is why we're trying to build capacity and competency through the National Training Agency.
In which area do you find that there is the need for training staff to be biggest?
Well, really, we want to cover all. Our initial focus is in tourism, in the hospitality industry, in customer service, and also in the construction industry. But we want to look at covering all of the industries to make sure that we have a well-rounded workforce.
Social services.
The PLP governments have always been rated heavily on social issues of our country, and certainly the Christi government continues that historical trek. The Ministry of Social Services is particularly very happy with this budget in terms of the developments on behalf of persons with disabilities, as well inclusive of both special needs children and post school age adults with disability, children with disabilities. Also, we have the social safety net reform, which again will be a part of this budget. And with regard to the facilities, you would have heard the Prime Minister in the budget communications speak about the multi-purpose facility that we expect to come on stream, and the community of persons with disabilities are certainly very excited about it and what it means to those children, particularly who would have been, past school age, and to have a facility where specifically for them, and to provide them as well with training and daycare services as well. And of course, then there's also the Our Lady School that is being transformed for children with special needs, and the Minister of Education and Science and Technology will speak more directly to that. But I just say the government for special needs children and persons with disabilities is back. Certainly, the community of persons with disabilities will be very pleased, because then reinforcing all of this, we expect very soon, hopefully before the summer break, to be able to lay the disability legislation in the House. In addition to that, of course, with regard to poverty alleviation and addressing the cycle of poverty in our country, you would all be aware of the Inter-American Development Bank loan that we have for the social safety net reform. We are well on the way with that. We have identified a project office. We have already identified a project officer, and fine-tuning all the details. And so we expect, we've done the pilot project in Grand Bahama, New Providence, Cat Island, and I think Eleuthera. A pilot project for the program in terms of developing what we call a proxy means test. But I will go into more detail on it in my budget presentation. But here again, we have a government with a major emphasis on the social safety net and the social welfare of our country. Thank you.
Minister Rowe.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first begin by congratulating the Minister of State for Finance for being so resolute and focused in his attempt to ensure that the finances of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas remains on good footing. And by any objective measure, you can see the trend that we're beginning to turn the corner on this economy, particularly with the focus on fiscal consolidation. From an investments perspective, Moody's has indicated recently their confidence in the Bahamas. When you compare us to all of our neighbors in the Caribbean, our levels of foreign direct investment and the type of investments we're beginning to attract indicates that we are very good when you compare us to our neighbors at what we do. And we're very excited about some of the projects that we currently have in the pipeline, resort projects. We have quite a number of alternative energy proposals that are before us. And we have several initiatives that we firmly believe will put us in a position long-term to really build this economy. And we've been working on the Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise Development Act, which we hope to have launched very shortly and table in Parliament, which will help us to provide some of the downstream benefits that has been absent from this economy over the years for small and medium-sized companies. We also will sign next week an economic development, technical cooperation with the IDB, which will allow us to establish an economic development unit in the Office of the Prime Minister, which will translate into an economic development plan for this country. So we are very excited about some of the work that we have done. We are very excited about all of the possibilities in investments in this country, and we're happy with the work that we've put in over the past year.
Attorney General.
Thank you. I too would like to congratulate the team at the Ministry of Finance for the extraordinary work that they've done, especially given the challenges with which they will face and we were all faced last year. I want to say on the crime front, very clearly, with the Commissioner of Police, crime is down. Things are heading in the right direction. However, this budget, and the Prime Minister said there is more to be done. We recognize the success of Project Safe Bahamas that has the holistic approach to dealing with crime, and that is prevention, detection and prosecution, and also rehabilitation. If you look at the budget, you'll see the provision for police cars, by way of example, which will enhance saturation patrols, which is so effective. We've seen the effectiveness of saturation patrols. We're going to enhance that. And we will see, people will see around the clock, police on the streets, which will address crime and also the fear of crime. We are also investing heavily in upgrading the defense force over the next 5 years to effectively patrol our waters and our borders, and we will see the effects of that as well. In relation to the courts, we will go into this more deeply in the budget debate, but you will see and have seen and felt the effect of swift justice and integrated justice, which is also considerably impacting the efficiency and the administration of justice. There's just one thing I would also like to point out about this budget, and it is clear that there's an integrated approach to governance. You will have, the question was, what about the arbitration center, and are we trying to impact more businesses in the Bahamas? If you look at the Downtown Nassau Development Act and look at the cultural businesses that will come the result of what the Prime Minister's announced, this pre-Lenten or Lenten cultural festival, like almost like a Junkanoo or several Junkanoo corporations. We can imagine the offshoot of that in selling costumes online, and everything was a spin-off from that. In Grand Bahama, on the arbitration center, my colleague ministers referred to professionals and he referred to lawyers by way of an example. But this also refers to support professionals. So court reporters, persons who are in the business of translation, in the arena that can support the administration of justice. They should be ready for the considerable expansion that is going to result because of our integrated approach to governance.
Thank you very much. During our Charter for Governance, or in our Charter for Governance, we committed to doubling our investment in education and training. And I think that during the first year, we have stuck to that commitment, and in fact, many areas we have more than doubled our investment in many areas in education. The Prime Minister has often been quoted as saying that education, not money, is the cure for poverty. And indeed, education, not jails, is the solution to crime. And I think that that in and of itself speaks about this Prime Minister and this government's commitment to having education as a priority. And I am pleased that as Minister of Education, the Prime Minister and all of my colleagues have been very supportive of putting education as a priority and understanding not only its importance to educating our citizens and our young people, but also its importance with regard to our national economic development as a country and as a people. And so I am happy that even
even as we go through all this, we have paid particular attention to ensure that we take care and make sure we consider those who are the least amongst us, those who have challenges. And I am so excited about the commitment we are making to special education in this country, and will continue to make moving forward. The other main thrust you will see will be that to preschool education. We are expanding preschools at a rapid rate. This year we've done quite a few, and the upcoming year you will see more. And this is essentially because we understand and appreciate that the statistics show that children who attend preschool have a better chance of being successful at school. Also, they perform better when they leave school in the workplace, earning higher income, which all goes towards national development. And so there are a lot of very positive things going on in the Ministry of Education, and I want to say a special thank you to all of the administrators in the ministry and the department, all of the teachers who sacrifice much every day to ensure that our kids get the best education possible, and all of those support staff from the security to janitress who keep our environment clean and safe so our kids can learn. It's a combined effort, it's a team effort, and I am very pleased with the results so far this year. We have still a very long way to go, and it's not going to be easy, but I am satisfied that from the government's perspective there's a commitment and a resolve, and with those within the ministry we accept the challenges that are posed in education in this country, and we feel very good moving forward. Thank you.
Sorry, man. My dog there loud. Thank you. Once again, I'd like to echo the sentiments of my colleague ministers, congratulate the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of State for Finance, Mr. Halkitis, for a job well done, a very innovative and balanced approach to fiscal management, talking about social and financial needs of a country and moving it forward. We continue to build on the great pillars of nation building, which are not just in Nassau, but also in our great family of islands, where we in the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture feel that the future lies in these islands for tremendous growth among these young people. On the youth front, you will see in this budget a great deal of headroom for productive programs for young people. With immediate effect, you will see some innovative youth employment programs this summer that will dovetail into education, training, and other areas. On the sports front, the most innovative sports program ever undertaken in the Bahamas, I think. The Prime Minister announced today that we will be building 5 sporting complexes in the islands that will attract major camps from overseas and local sports academies, which will transform those communities. And finally, on the culture front, where our national identity now will take on a new flavor in the context of Bahamian Carnival, which we think will transform the creative and cultural industry in the Bahamas and really give room for tremendous growth with our tourism product, but also tremendous growth with our local festival idea. So we in this ministry, as a result of this budget, now see ourselves going full speed ahead into the business of sports, into the business of culture, and we will see great returns from this. We thank you very much for a very innovative budget.
Do you have some summary comments, sir?
Just to say that thank you again all for coming, and as we commence the debate on Wednesday and debate over the next approximate week, we will have the opportunity to shed more light on some of the programs, but I just wanted to leave you with the commitment of this administration to be disciplined, to be focused, and to be consistent with our strategy because we understand that we must get this country back on a firm financial footing. We've developed a balanced approach. We're committed to the full execution of that approach, and we think that as we move on, the Bahamian people will see the results of that. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Hey.
One additional question.
Sure.
How realistic is it for government to reduce its debt to the area of 50% by 2016-2017?
We think it's realistic. As you see, in the last budget, we forecast a deficit of 6.5%. Even in the face of reduced revenues, we were able to actually beat that forecast and get it down to just, it's about 6.2% this year that will be concluding. We forecast next year that we will get that down to 5.1%. Earlier this year, we indicated to all the agencies and departments that we needed them to be more disciplined and more thorough and to identify savings in their budgets. We've been very successful with that, and we'll give you more details, but we're happy with the results of that. So we think that if we are focused on ensuring, firstly, that we are still able to deliver the level of services to the Bahamian people, but also recognizing that it is our duty to make sure that every dollar we spend of taxpayers' money, we get maximum value for money. We believe that if we continue on our disciplined and focused strategy, that we'll be able to get it done. So we are confident.
Okay. Also, one more question. A white paper on the value-added tax system was distributed some time ago.
Yes.
I just wanted to know what kind of feedback you got from stakeholders, as well as what is going to be the process to get that up and running before the end of the year.
We have draft legislation now, which we are, as the Prime Minister mentioned in the communication, we are doing our vetting and double-checking. We have met with various industry stakeholders, including manufacturers, the Hotel Association, the Accounting Association, and some others. And we will continue with those meetings of those professional groups. They have given us certain ideas of what they think should happen. And we are taking those on board and putting them under consideration. As the Prime Minister said, we look to have the draft legislation ready for public dissemination by early summer, which will give the public opportunity to digest it and look at all of the provisions. It gives us some more time to fully flesh out things like what will be exempt, etc. And we will accelerate the public education program as well for members of the public. But the education program, I want to stress, has started already with our consultation with the professional and the business groups.
I know the Prime Minister mentioned this briefly, but can you give us an update on how the real property forgiveness initiative went?
We are very encouraged, and I will be able to give you some figures when I contribute to the debate on this coming Wednesday. But we have had, the last figures I had is we have had at least 200 individuals come forward and represent and register their properties. We believe that as we go closer to the deadline of June 30th for those individuals to come forth, we'll see some acceleration in that. But we're encouraged that we're able to get several hundred new properties on the roll, and so going forward, we'll be able to collect from those which we previously were not collecting from. And I would just like to take this opportunity to encourage those who have not yet taken advantage of it to do so, please.
Press conference following the budget communication by Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christi, Ministers of State, Michael Hakitis and Kalis Roll, Ministers Melanie Griffin, Shane Gibson, Jerome Fitzgerald, and Allison Maynard Gibson, Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General, expounding further on what was announced by Prime Minister Christi. 1.5, revenue 1.7, expenditure 443, GFS deficit, that's projected for 2013-2014, 5.1 GFS deficit, going in the direction that the government wants. Also, exigency orders for building materials, vehicles for the next 90 days. The opposition leader wants the government to encourage local purchasing. We're going to have, of course, reports on all of this in the 1 o'clock radio report and in the Bahamas tonight. And so that's it from here at the House of Assembly. Wednesday, June the 5th, budget debate 2013-2014 begins. For the entire team, I'm Anthony Newbold, Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.